I was once a 32-year-old data analyst at FinTech Solutions, a growing software company that initially felt like my dream workplace. The supportive culture, collaborative team, and work-life balance made coming to the office something I genuinely looked forward to each morning. Then a new manager arrived, and everything changed. What began as subtle shifts in workplace dynamics eventually became unbearable, leading me to execute what I now call my revenge resignation. Little did I know, my departure would trigger the collapse and complete restructuring of an entire department. Therefore, before I share the details of this story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe if you have ever experienced a toxic workplace situation. 5 years ago, I interviewed at FinTech Solutions after spending 3 years at a larger corporation, where I felt like just another number. The interview process at FinTech was refreshingly different. Instead of rigid technical assessments, the team wanted to know about my problem-solving approach and how I collaborated with others. After 3 rounds of interviews, I received a call from Sarah Jenkins, who would become my direct manager, offering me the position of senior data analyst. From day one, the company culture exceeded my expectations. Everyone left the office by 6 p.m. weekend. Work was discouraged, and my ideas were genuinely valued. Our team consisted of 8 people who quickly became more than just colleagues. We celebrated birthdays together, helped each other through difficult projects, and even organized monthly game nights outside of work. Sarah was the kind of manager everyone dreams about. She provided clear direction, while trusting us to execute without micromanagement. During my first performance review, she focused not just on metrics but on my growth and career aspirations. When I mentioned wanting to develop leadership skills, she immediately assigned me to lead a small project team. That first project became a defining moment in my early career at FinTech. We developed a customer data analytics system that identified spending patterns and potential investment opportunities for our banking clients. The project was implemented 3 weeks ahead of schedule and increased client engagement by 32% within the first quarter. Sarah made sure the entire executive team knew about our success and my contribution specifically. After 18 months, I was promoted to lead data analyst, overseeing 3 junior analysts on my team. The promotion came with a 20% salary increase and more input into strategic decisions. I remember calling my parents that evening, barely able to contain my excitement about how perfectly my career was progressing. William Harrington, our CEO at that time, created an environment where innovation thrived. He knew most employees by name and regularly joined different teams for lunch to stay connected with what was happening throughout the company. During one of these lunches, he asked about a pattern recognition algorithm I had developed, showing genuine interest in the technical details. That 15-minute conversation led to additional resources being allocated to expand my project. The company grew rapidly, expanding from 60 employees to over 200 within 2 years. Despite this growth, the culture remained strong, largely due to William insisting on preserving what made the company special in the first place. New hires were selected not just for their technical skills, but for their alignment with our collaborative values. In my 3rd year, I led the development of an enterprise-wide data integration platform that ultimately helped FinTech secure a contract with National Commerce Bank, our largest client to date. The project required coordinating across departments and solving complex technical challenges that our competitors had struggled with for years. When the platform launched successfully, William announced my accomplishment during the all-hands meeting and presented me with the Annual Excellence Award, which included a $5,000 bonus. One of my fondest memories was the company retreat to Lake Tahoe. During the evening dinner, I found myself seated with several executive leaders who asked for my input on future product development. That night crystallized what made FinTech special. Everyone, regardless of position, was valued for their expertise and perspective. I went to bed that night feeling incredibly fortunate to have found such a perfect professional home. Everything changed when tech giant Incorporated acquired FinTech Solutions. Initially, the executives assured us that nothing substantial would change and that they valued the culture we had built. For the first few months, that seemed mostly true, though small signs of corporate bureaucracy began creeping in. More paperwork, additional approval steps for projects, and slightly less transparent communication from leadership. 6 months after the acquisition, William announced his departure. He called a company meeting, expressed his gratitude for the years we had built together, and assured us that he was leaving the company in good hands. I still remember the hollow feeling in my stomach as he gave his farewell speech. Something told me this was the beginning of the end of the FinTech I knew and loved. Within weeks of William leaving, Sarah informed our team that she was being transferred to head up a different division. She tried to reassure us that the change would be positive, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Our weekly one-on-one meeting before her transfer was emotional. She told me how proud she was of my growth, and made me promise to stay true to my values, regardless of what happened next. 2 weeks later, Frank Peterson was introduced as our new Director of Data Analytics. From our first department meeting, it was clear his management style drastically differed from what we were accustomed to. He spoke about key performance indicators, efficiency metrics, and resource optimization, with barely a mention of innovation or employee development. The shift in language might seem subtle to outsiders, but to those of us who had been with the company for years, it was jarring. The changes came quickly after that. First, Frank eliminated our flexible work-from-home policy, requiring everyone to be in the office 5 days a week for maximum visibility. Next, our quarterly team-building activities were cut due to budget optimization. Then, our comprehensive health insurance plan was downgraded to reduce costs. Frank introduced a new performance tracking system that required us to account for every 30 minutes of our workday. Projects that previously encouraged creative problem-solving now came with rigid specifications and inflexible deadlines. The joy was being systematically squeezed out of our work. My first performance review with Frank was nothing like the growth-oriented conversations with Sarah. He barely looked up from his spreadsheet as he critiqued my numbers without acknowledging the quality of my work or the positive feedback from clients. When I mentioned the mentoring I was doing with junior team members, he dismissed it as time that could be better spent on billable tasks. James and Amanda, 2 colleagues who had started at FinTech around the same time as me, began applying for jobs elsewhere. Over lunch one day, James confided that he could no longer recognize the company we had once loved. Amanda, who had recently returned from maternity leave, was stressed about the newly inflexible hours, making childcare nearly impossible. The breaking point for many came when Frank assigned a major client project with an impossible timeline. When I explained the technical limitations and suggested a more realistic schedule, he accused me of lacking commitment. We worked nights and weekends to meet his deadline, only for Frank to criticize the inevitable small errors that resulted from the rush. During a presentation to the executive team, Frank presented my data architecture design as if it had been his idea all along. When a board member specifically asked who had developed the innovative approach, Frank vaguely attributed it to his leadership of the team. I sat there stunned by the blatant credit stealing, but felt powerless to speak up. That evening, I called Sarah for advice. She listened sympathetically and acknowledged that similar changes were happening throughout the company. She suggested documenting everything and focusing on building relationships with clients that could translate to references if I needed to look elsewhere. That conversation was the first time I seriously considered leaving the company I had once thought would be my long-term professional home. Over the next few months, Frank escalated his criticism of my work during team meetings. No matter how thoroughly I prepared or how positive the client feedback, he would find something to publicly critique. In one particularly humiliating incident, he interrupted my presentation to question basic methodological choices that we had previously agreed upon, making me appear incompetent in front of the entire department. The culture shift affected everyone, not just me. Within a single month, 3 of my teammates resigned. These were talented professionals with years of experience and deep institutional knowledge. Rather than addressing the exodus, Frank quickly replaced them with recent graduates who had little practical experience, but would work for significantly lower salaries. The quality of our work inevitably suffered, yet Frank blamed the remaining senior staff for not picking up the slack. A critical financial analytics project I had been leading for 6 months was suddenly micromanaged by Frank. He insisted on changes that contradicted industry best practices and ignored my concerns about potential errors. When those errors materialized and a client complained, Frank publicly blamed my team for the implementation failures, conveniently omitting his own interventions. My workload effectively doubled as the team shrank. Yet the expectations and deadlines only became more aggressive. I began arriving at 6 a.m. and rarely left before 8 p.m. Weekends, once sacred family time, were now spent catching up on work that could not be completed during the already extended weekdays. My physical health deteriorated from stress and lack of sleep. I developed persistent headaches and started experiencing anxiety attacks for the first time in my life. After particularly harsh criticism in a department meeting, I scheduled a meeting with human resources, hoping they might intervene, or at least document the increasingly hostile work environment. The HR representative listened politely, but ultimately suggested that I needed to adapt to new management styles. She emphasized that the company was going through necessary changes to remain competitive. I left feeling even more isolated than before. Through conversations with colleagues in other departments, I discovered Frank had a history of what employment lawyers call constructive dismissal. He would make working conditions so unbearable that employees would quit voluntarily, saving the company from paying severance or risking wrongful termination lawsuits. At least 2 senior analysts in another branch had left under similar circumstances after Frank briefly oversaw their division during a restructuring. One evening while working late, I accidentally saw an email on a shared printer. It was from Frank to his superior detailing cost-cutting success through what he termed effective talent management. The email explicitly stated that pushing out senior staff and replacing them with junior employees had resulted in a 30% reduction in department operating costs. The clinical way he discussed essentially forcing people out of their jobs made me physically nauseous. The final member of our original team still working with me was Tyler Washington, who had been with the company even longer than I had. We had once been a tight-knit collaborative group that celebrated each other and produced exceptional work. Now we barely spoke during the day, each of us keeping our heads down, trying to avoid becoming the next target of frank public criticism. The camaraderie that had once defined our workplace culture had been completely destroyed. One evening, after everyone else had left, Tyler came to my desk looking troubled. He closed the door and spoke in a hushed voice, even though no one else was around. With obvious discomfort, he revealed that he had overheard Frank speaking with the VP of Operations about future staffing. Frank had specifically mentioned that I was not aligned with the new company direction, and that they were building a case for my termination. According to Tyler, Frank had been collecting minor infractions and documenting performance issues, many of which were either manufactured or resulted directly from his own interference. The next day I came in early and discreetly reviewed some department performance reports. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears and sent a cold shock through my body. Frank had been systematically altering performance metrics in the reporting system. My actual customer satisfaction scores were consistently above 95%, but in his executive summaries, Frank had reduced them to barely acceptable levels. Project completion times had been adjusted to appear longer than reality. Even revenue numbers for projects I led had been understated. The following week brought the most humiliating experience of my professional career. During the quarterly review meeting with client representatives and our executive team, Frank presented a detailed analysis of a recent project failure. He specifically highlighted decisions that I allegedly made which led to the system errors. What he conveniently omitted was that I had documented these exact concerns 3 months earlier and had explicitly recommended a different approach. Frank had overruled me and actually demanded the very changes that led to the failure. When I attempted to clarify the record, Frank immediately interrupted, stating that this was not the time for excuses and that we needed to focus on solutions. The room fell silent, and I could see a mix of pity and discomfort on my colleagues' faces. That single moment crystallized everything that had happened over the past year. I was being systematically undermined and set up to take the blame for failures that were not of my making. 2 days after the meeting, I received an email notifying me that I was being placed on a performance improvement plan due to unsatisfactory project outcomes and client feedback issues. The PIP included impossible targets and would require weekly meetings with Frank to review progress. Anyone familiar with corporate structures knows that PIPs are rarely genuine attempts to improve performance. More often, they are the first step in building documentation for termination. That same week, while working with the financial reporting system, I discovered something disturbing. Frank had modified several key reports just days before submitting them to the executive team. The modifications concealed his own decision to rush implementation without proper testing, a decision that ultimately cost the company a contract renewal worth over $2 million. Yet in the official record, the failure appeared to be due to analytical errors from my team. Desperate for intervention, I requested a meeting with the new CEO, hoping that the issues might be addressed at a higher level. The meeting was brief and disappointing. The CEO expressed full confidence in Frank's leadership and suggested that perhaps I was struggling to adapt to the more rigorous performance standards of the parent company. It became painfully clear that Frank had been very effective at controlling the narrative about our department performance and my individual contributions. The following weeks were the darkest period of my professional life. I could barely sleep, averaging 3 hours a night. I lost 15 pounds as my appetite disappeared. The anxiety became so severe that I would sit in my car for 20 minutes each morning, trying to gather the courage to walk into the building. Friends commented that I seemed like a different person, withdrawn, and constantly worried. I began to question my own abilities, and worth wondering if perhaps frank assessment was accurate, and I simply was not good enough. Then came the discovery that changed everything. While preparing documentation for a compliance audit, I came across an email thread that had been accidentally included in a shared folder. In it, Frank explicitly discussed with another director his strategy for pushing out senior employees who had been with the company before the acquisition. He called it Operation Clean Slate, and emphasized the financial benefits of having employees quit rather than firing them. Most shocking was his mention of a special bonus structure tied to department cost reductions from which he personally benefited. The final breaking point came during a critical financial reporting period. A significant error appeared in one of our quarterly reports to investors. The error was clearly traced back to a methodology change Frank had insisted upon, despite written warnings from both my team and the accounting department. Yet in the all-hands emergency meeting, Frank looked me directly in the eyes and asked me to explain to everyone how such a critical mistake could have happened under my supervision. He expected me to fall on my sword for his mistake, potentially exposing myself to professional and even legal consequences. That night, I made my decision. I would resign, but not quietly. I would not simply disappear as so many others had done. If I was going to leave, I would ensure that the truth about what was happening in our department would be impossible to ignore. Over the next 2 weeks, I meticulously planned my exit while continuing to perform my duties without giving any indication of my intentions. First, I gathered evidence. I downloaded emails documenting instances where my recommendations had been overruled, followed by subsequent failures. I collected the original performance data and compared it with the modified versions Frank had presented. I recorded meetings where legal in our one-party consent state, capturing Frank contradicting himself and making impossible demands. I organized everything chronologically, building a comprehensive picture of systematic mismanagement and potential ethical violations. Next, I reached out to Sarah, my former manager. Though she had been moved to another division, she still had significant institutional knowledge and relationships within the company. When I explained what had been happening, she was appalled, but not entirely surprised. She connected me with Kevin Richardson, the Chief Compliance Officer, suggesting that he might be the right person to approach with my concerns. I also consulted with an employment attorney to understand my rights and the potential implications of my planned actions. The attorney confirmed that the evidence I had collected suggested multiple violations of company policy and possibly labor laws. He helped me draft language for my resignation letter that would be clear and factual without crossing into legally problematic territory. Over the weekend, I compiled a 30-page report detailing the state of the data analytics department. I included specific examples of misrepresentation of data-altered performance metrics and the systematic dismantling of a once high-performing team. I attached supporting documentation for every claim, and organized it all in a clear, professional manner that could not be dismissed as the complaints of a disgruntled employee. I also reached out to several former colleagues who had left the company in the past year. Without revealing my plans, I asked about their experiences and whether they would be willing to share their perspectives on the department changes. Many were eager to talk, and with their permission, I included anonymous testimonials that corroborated the patterns I had identified. Before executing my plan, I made sure to complete all my current project responsibilities. I documented all processes, updated all relevant knowledge bases, and prepared transition documents. Whatever happened next, I wanted to ensure that clients and remaining team members would not suffer unnecessarily from my departure. On a Monday morning, I submitted my formal resignation letter. Unlike standard resignations, mine was addressed not just to HR and my immediate supervisor, but also to the CEO, the board of directors, the compliance department, and the head of internal audit. Attached was my complete report, along with the supporting evidence. In my email, I stated clearly that I could no longer in good conscience be part of a department where unethical practices were not only tolerated but rewarded, and where dedicated professionals were systematically mistreated to achieve cost reductions. Within 2 hours, I received a call from Kevin in compliance, requesting an immediate meeting. He had already reviewed parts of my report and wanted to discuss the details in person. During our 3-hour meeting, Kevin asked thorough, thoughtful questions and took extensive notes. He explained that my allegations were extremely serious and would trigger a formal investigation according to company policy. The initial corporate response was predictably cautious. I was asked to reconsider my resignation and stay during the investigation. I declined, but offered to make myself available for any questions from the investigative team. Frank was conspicuously absent from the office that day, though rumors quickly spread about my dramatic exit. Many colleagues, even those from other departments, sent private messages of support, often including their own stories of similar experiences. A week after my resignation, I received a call from Kevin that I never expected. The internal investigation had moved with unprecedented speed and had already verified many of my key allegations. The evidence I provided had been corroborated by internal records and testimonies from current and former employees. Kevin informed me that Frank had been terminated effective immediately, and 2 mid-level managers who had enabled his behavior were placed on administrative leave pending further review. The most surprising part of the call was when Kevin shared that the CEO had requested a private meeting with me. The investigation findings had apparently shocked the executive team and prompted serious reflection on the company culture they had allowed to develop post-acquisition. During our meeting, the CEO offered a formal apology for failing to properly oversee the integration process and for not being more accessible to employees during the transition. I was offered a position as the new director of data analytics, with increased compensation and explicit authority to rebuild the department according to my vision. After careful consideration, I declined the full-time role. The experience had been too traumatic, and I needed space from the organization that had allowed things to deteriorate so dramatically. However, I did agree to serve as a consultant during the transition period, helping to stabilize the department and establish healthier processes. The company announced a comprehensive restructuring of the data analytics department. Sarah was brought back to lead the division, bringing her people-centered management approach that had originally helped the department thrive. New policies were implemented to prevent the kind of metric manipulation and misrepresentation that had occurred under Frank leadership. Perhaps most significantly, many former employees were contacted and invited to return under improved conditions, with several accepting the offer. During my 3-month consulting period, I witnessed a gradual but meaningful transformation. The fear that had permeated the department began to dissipate. People started sharing ideas again, challenging assumptions when appropriate, and collaborating instead of competing. Client satisfaction scores, which had been steadily declining, began to recover as project quality improved. After completing my consulting obligation, I took 3 months off to travel and recover from the emotional toll of the previous year. I hiked in national parks, visited friends in different cities, and spent time reflecting on what I wanted for the next phase of my career. The experience had been painful, but also clarifying. I now had a much clearer understanding of the kind of workplace culture I needed to thrive, and the warning signs to watch for in future employers. Eventually, I accepted a position with a smaller but growing company whose founders explicitly valued transparency, collaboration, and employee well-being. The role offered less prestige than my previous director opportunity, but provided something much more valuable: a healthy environment where I could do my best work without compromising my values or well-being. I maintained connections with Sarah and several former colleagues, creating an informal support network for professional advice and occasional commiseration. These relationships proved valuable not only for my career, but for my emotional recovery. Speaking with others who had shared similar experiences helped me process what had happened and reassured me that the problems had been systemic rather than personal. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the number of people who reached out to me for advice after experiencing similar situations in their own workplaces. I became an unofficial consultant for those navigating toxic work environments, helping them gather evidence, understand their rights, and plan strategic exits when necessary. Knowing that my experience helped others avoid some of the trauma I endured gave meaning to an otherwise painful chapter of my professional life. The most profound lesson I learned was about the value of speaking truth, even when it is frightening to do so. For too long, I and others had remained silent, each of us thinking we were alone in our struggles, or hoping things would somehow improve without confrontation. That silence allowed harmful practices to continue and even escalate. By finally speaking up, not just for myself but for everyone affected, I helped catalyze necessary change. I also learned about my own resilience. There were moments during that final year when I questioned my worth, competence, and future. The gaslighting and manipulation had taken a tremendous toll on my self-confidence. Yet in the end, I found the strength not only to remove myself from a toxic situation, but to do so in a way that created positive change for others. That knowledge gives me confidence that I can face future challenges with greater wisdom and courage. Sometimes the hardest decision is not whether to stay or go, but how to leave in a way that aligns with your values. A resignation can be more than just an exit. It can be an act of advocacy, truth-telling, and ultimately healing. For anyone trapped in a toxic workplace, I hope my story provides both comfort and courage. Sometimes leaving is not giving up. It is standing up for yourself and for those without a voice. And that might be the greatest victory I never saw coming. What workplace injustice have you witnessed or experienced, and how did you handle it? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to my channel for more authentic workplace narratives. And if you know someone struggling in a toxic work environment, share this video with them. It might give them the courage they need to make a change. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that standing up for what is right is never easy, but always worth it.